A single walker hobbles down the highway alone by itself, its body mangled with a single arm dangling by its side, skin gray and clothes covered in black stained blood and dirt. It turns its head to a sudden shifting of noise. A pair of footsteps close in from behind. As the walker turns its head, it is caved in by the stock of a shotgun. Moving past the dead, Shane scurries on foot, gun in hand with a single backpack strapped to him. Behind him, a small herd of around 30 walkers followed. They were about 50 yards away from him, but even that was still too close for comfort. Looking ahead, he could see that not too far out was a collection of buildings surrounded by fences. Hoping to get away from the dead, he tossed his items over before falling quickly after. The place was deserted by the looks of it. The windows were either boarded up or completely torn down. Some of the buildings were burned, while others were littered with bullet holes. Even the cars were stripped and looted. Whatever happened here was a long time ago. A long time, Shane thought to himself. Nearly 7 months had passed since he left the group at the farm. He had lost some weight due to hunger, and by now his hair had begun to grow out once more. He had thought of the group from time to time, and at one point even tried to get back to them, though it wasn't a successful trip. Shane had returned to the farm roughly a week later, only to find it in ruins. The barn was burnt to a crisp, with the RV next to it covered in bullet holes. A hail of a herd, numbering somewhere into the hundreds, if not thousands, led right through the ranch-style home that housed everyone. Shane searched through the wreckage and the dead, recognizing only bits and pieces of what appears to be members of Herschel's family. Half of the cars were gone, and with that sign, Shane would have a sigh of relief that the others had escaped. Yet something would eat away at Shane. What on earth would attract a herd this big to the farm? The only true threat Shane knew of was the group Randall claimed to be from. Perhaps they had come back to finish the job, using the walkers as a weapon against the group. It was all speculation, but Shane had to make a decision. Try and track down the group, who are likely hundreds of miles away at this point, or go on with his one-man journey. Shane would eventually weigh the two options and decide that everyone is as good as gone now by this point. He had left them, and he would now have to live with that. Shane grabs his things and scavenges what he could from the wreckage of the farm, and goes on once more by his lonesome. His first stop will be the small rural town Glenn had previously gone to for supplies with Maggie. Reaching the place, he would find it eerily quiet and deserted, or so he thought. Within a few hours of going through the buildings, he found himself set upon by a number of assailants. What seemed to be like 3 men tried to tackle and grapple him to the ground. All the while, a woman rushed towards his jeep to grab what she could. Shane would curse his attackers as he pulled his knife, killing the first. The second would push off him, going for his knocked-over shotgun. But with only having to deal with one attacker now, Shane was able to grab his pistol from his back and fire 2 shots into the chest of the attacker. The last, a woman, gasps and cries out as the third and final standing attacker is hit 3 times in the chest, dropping dead. A young man around Glenn's age. Shane, getting to his feet, holds the woman at gunpoint. She would plead for mercy from Shane, but he would just scream at her to be quiet. Hearing a skittering of cans from behind, Shane would turn his focus, only for the woman to charge at him. 2 shots would be fired, and the woman would drop dead with a gunshot wound to the face. Turning back to the noise, Shane would call out for whoever was there to show themselves, or he would put them down. Slowly out from the corner of the store stood a girl. Hands raised, she was terrified. And shock was now apparent. Shane holstered his gun, stepping back in horror. He had just orphaned this girl. Scared of what he had just done, he simply apologized and began to walk back to his jeep, repeating "I'm sorry" over and over. Gasping for air as he felt the panic come over him, Shane looked back at his rearview mirror as he drove away. He watched the girl run off as walkers began to come into view from the distance. He began to cry apologetically as he drove away from the town. Something had just broken in him, as he thought about Carl, and more specifically Sophia. The months would drag on, and winter would come. Shane would eventually find himself shelter in the form of an abandoned lake cabin. He would choose to hunker down there, rationing out the cans of food he had been able to scavenge, as well as taking on rodents or birds he could find and turning them into jerky. Using a pot and fire to boil the pond water, and only ever leaving to make sure his area was secure. One day, though, while traveling the perimeter, he would hear gunfire in the distance. Yet it was still close by, enough to worry him. Shane would move quickly to investigate and would stumble upon a group of survivors running after someone. They didn't know he was there, and Shane debated leaving them to their devices as he had now very limited ammo. That was until he saw one of the men holding the person they were after. It was the same girl he had run into all those months ago in the town. Memories began to rush back for Shane, and overcome with guilt and anger, he began to slide down the hillside towards them. He could hear the men talk about what they were going to do to her, but before they could even rip her shirt, Shane opened fire. Letting off 3 rapid shells in quick succession, he downed the 2 men, wounding the third. The fourth, holding only a knife, would drop his weapon, stepping away from the girl. Yet before he could say a word, Shane pulled out his own knife and drove into the skull of the man. He would then grab a pistol from the ground and walk over to the last wounded man lying on the ground and without hesitation put a bullet in his head. With his task completed, Shane would turn to check on the girl, only to see her raising a gun to him. She was obviously scared, but she tried her hardest to put on a brave face. Shane would ask if she remembered him. She would answer he was the one that killed her mom. Shane went on and say that he did. When he asks if she's going to shoot him, he flinches as she pulls the trigger only for the gun to be empty. Shane would walk over and take the gun from her, making sure that it truly was empty and not just unchambered. He would then turn to her and ask if she was coming, suggesting she come with him. She would respond that they need to kill all the attackers first. Shane would argue that he already did that, but she would point to the one of the corpses and tell him that he was going to come back. Believing this to be just some strange ramble of a scared girl, Shane would attempt to reassure her that he was dead, only to be cut off as he saw the corpse that had a softball-sized hole clearly through his chest jitter and rise up back with a growl. Shane would curse at the sight, using the rifle to bash in the walker's skull. "You have to aim for the head," the girl would tell him, "or the dead will just come back. Just like my family did." Shane would turn to see the sadness on her face, understanding what she meant by that. The two would spend the next few months at the cabin, eating the rations and staying warm in the cabin. She would say her name is Dakota. Her and her family were apparently heading towards Texas before they ran into Shane. They saw him with his supplies and were starving, so they thought they could take him by surprise, but that didn't work out. Shane would tell her about his time before the outbreak and the group he left afterwards. The two would bond over their shared time together, picking games like checkers, chess, and tic-tac-toe as ways to pass the time. Though during their time together, Shane would notice the strange behaviors she would show. It would be as if she was putting on a front for him. Finally, one day, Shane would just call her out on it. He's been a cop for many years and had met his fair share of liars in his time. Dakota would finally shake her mask and show just how cold she really was, telling Shane about all the ways she thought about killing him and taking his stuff. Shane would just laugh at the revelation to her surprise. Happy she was finally being honest with him, he would tell her to stay that way with him. If they ever came across others, then she should use her talents to stay alive. But if it's just them, then as long as she stays honest with him, they would survive. Agreeing to the deal, Shane would finally hand her a pistol. Dakota would question how he could trust her after what she told him. Shane would just answer that trust goes both ways and has to start somewhere. Her being honest now was the first step. Now that he knew what she was capable of, he could make proper decisions when it came to her. If she follows his lead, then they would do more than survive. They would thrive in this world. Dakota would then finally tell Shane about the men who attacked her, and how the one who led them had a prosthetic arm with a bayonet attached to it. The snow would finally start to melt, and winter was winding down, and spring was upon them. Shane and Dakota prepared their items and equipment getting into the Jeep. From what Dakota knew, the so-called group led by the one-armed man appeared to apparently be camped out some 70 miles out from them. They glossed over their map and noticed a handful of places within their territory. A small highway west stop, a couple of rural neighborhoods, and lastly a prison. The final spot was a town most likely where the one-armed man's group was located, as it would be the only place to truly house any group of his supposed size. Dakota would ask where they would go, and Shane would tell her that they were low on supplies, so the best option would be to head to the housing areas to see what they could find. But before then, they would hit the rest stop and see if there was any chance they could siphon any gas. She would agree, liking his plan. The two would set off on their adventure. Only things would not be as simple for them. Upon reaching the gas station, they ran into a herd of walkers. Without any gas to flee, Shane would hand Dakota a map and tell her to meet him at the marked area. Wait until morning for him, and if he didn't return, then to find her way to the second spot. He would tell her to do this for each of the 3 marked areas, telling her that she would survive and that he will find her again just like how he did before. Dakota would flee from the herd, while Shane fired shots into the air to attract the herd away in a diversion. Running along the highway, Shane would bash the head of a walker before finding a fenced area and hopping the fence for safety. Walking the deserted area, he would soon hear the sound of growling and snarling. The herds somehow had made their way around the fence and were now upon him. As Shane prepared a final stand, he was suddenly met by a hail of bullets ripping past him into the herd moving down. Shane would turn to see who was near and would see a group of around 15 men in trucks and cars. One man would step out from the crowd, waving his hand to call Shane over. Next to him was someone Shane couldn't believe. Merle stood tall, cracking some shitty joke as he waved his amputated arm at him. Dakota waited for a day, and Shane would not show up. She would go to the next spot, and still nothing. Finally believing that she had more than likely lost Shane, she began to calculate her next move when suddenly she heard voices nearby. She would hide herself and stalk the people that moved around the building she was staying in. Watching the group, she would see that there were 4 men now, 2 women, talking about how low they were on supplies. Seeing a chance and knowing Shane by now would want her to keep going, Dakota would come out of hiding and beg for the help, putting on a mask of a scared kid. The group would hesitate, but one of them, who seemed like their leader, would welcome her to their group and offer protection. The others would question him, but he responded saying she was just a kid and that he was going to help her. He would ask her her name, and she would tell him her name was Dakota. He would tell her she was safe now and that his name was Tyrese. And that is going to end our story for today. Yeah, so it took me a while to finally get this story out as I had to re-record a couple times. Like I said in my update post, this was, for some reason, corrupted like 3 times over as I tried to edit it and put it all together. But here it is now. It's finally done. I'm really happy to touch base and like get back to The Walking Dead, as with the new show, like The Ones Who Live came out. It was like a good jump of like inspiration to just go ahead and keep the story going. For those who don't recognize Dakota, she is actually a character from Fear the Walking Dead. And so is like her family, and her whole thing is like, she starts off as like this like innocent kid, but you soon realize that she's actually kind of a sociopath because of like all the trauma and everything she goes through. And she ends up like being an antagonist for the group because of her mother being killed. But in this story, I thought of the idea of like Shane. He is the first one of the group to adapt to the world the way it is, and it's not until around like season 4 all the other characters actually become the same as him. And I would say still, like, if they're able to still have like connections with like people and everything like that, then so is Shane. Yeah, he was more abrasive and upfront about it, but he was still like originally a leader of the group. He kept people alive, and he really only killed if he absolutely felt like he needed to. And with Randall, he did feel like he needed to, and then with Rick, when he tried to kill him in the actual like comic and show, he was technically right about the fact that Rick couldn't keep Lori and Carl safe, but that's besides the point. So yeah, I decided I wanted to pair these 2 characters up and see how their chemistry would work. And I feel that Shane, being such a seasoned police officer, would be able to see through her facade, but also with like that guilt of like killing her family, would also force Shane to like open up to her and treat her like the same way he would like Sophia or Carl. Yeah, and I'm really excited to see where that would go. I'm also excited to see like what a character like Dakota would be like with the main group, as I'm starting to merge like those 2 plot lines together from, I would say, like the season 3 point of like the prison arc and like the governor and everything. And of course, lastly, the last run-in is Shane meeting the governor and Merle. Yeah, really excited about that one, as I've been going back and forth on how far I want to take that plot line and like how much I want to dive into it. So I'm excited to show you where I'm all at with that. If you like this story and you like to see my others, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe and hit the bell notification so you guys don't miss out. Yeah, this has been the Writer's Cantina. I'm your host, JD, and I appreciate you all. Y'all have a good one. Bye.